Welcome to our end of 2022 series, The Worst Publisher of 2022, where we are basically going to go through a scorecard of every publisher in the industry. We're going to see their wins, their losses, and at the end of the day, we are going to be able to crown the best and the worst in the games industry for this year. Of course, with the help of today's sponsor. Brilliant. They're the best way to learn new STEM fields, improve your prospects, and better yourself, all via their fantastic site and app. First 200 to click my link, get 20% off. Now, they teach through interactive quizzes that are fun. They have curiosity, inspiring problems, all in a way that is learning by doing, where making mistakes is okay. Now, probability. I think it's fun, especially when it's not that intuitive, and I've absolutely loved their perplexing probability course, even just for the fun brain teasers. I mean, the Monty Hall problem? It's an awesome puzzle. It's such a classic, especially when you know its amazing backstory. It's where Marilyn Vos Savant basically got the problem right. She then had almost 1,000 PhDs write to her magazine that she columned in to say that she was wrong. But of course, she was right. It's an amazing real-world example of how probability flummoxes everyone, no matter how smart they are. Learning probability sharpens your thinking incredibly, giving you more powerful cognitive arms to deploy in your day-to-day life. So don't just sponge in facts, learn by doing. Brilliant.org/Bellular News, where the first 200 to click will get 20% off their annual subscription. Today, we're kicking off with Sony, and Matt is back.
It's been a while. I'm out of the Dragonflight mines. I can talk about video game news again. And that's wonderful. Especially at this time, we can get to talk about the worst publisher of 2022. That's going to be a serious competition because so many publishers just continually shit the bed effectively, cause real bother. So we get to have fun figuring out which ones were actually the genuine worst.
And when we look to Sony, we are going to find that while they do have a lot of controversies, when it comes to the actual games, Sony are probably the most uncontroversially successful, right? So Uncharted Legacy of Thieves Collection, PC, PS5, overall, incredible ratings, great set of games, and Iron Galaxy did the PC port, not the usual Nixies. Does seem that both Iron Galaxy and Nixies are pretty good at what they do. We've got God of War, came out in PC. That port was one that was absolutely stunning, with people even being able to play that on a Ryzen APU.
That was
cracked. Insane.
Yeah, and that wasn't even, I think Nixies supported, but that was Santa Monica. So that was Santa Monica have enough resources to finish Ragnarok and also port God of War. So you go, they're a talented studio and a big one. And they're actually, making their money's worth, which is more than you can say for a lot of very big studios. Honestly.
Yeah, Horizon then is a funny one because, look, you can't look at Horizon and say this is a bad game.
It's not in any capacity.
Yeah, it is a really good game. It was received really well by critics, also really well by players. It was just overshadowed by Elden Ring. I think a situation where it improved on its predecessor in every aspect, but I suppose I'd maybe say, in trying to be the format of game that it is and to have a very broad appeal, it was perhaps never able to fully realize its potential. I think a really good example is, I remember you talking about how when you put that game up to the very high difficulty levels, quite a lot of its combat system actually can shine. Then you have a problem with some of its looting system, where there's almost a narrow band of where it feels like the actual game design truly shines through. And I guess you look at a game like Elden Ring, and while, yes, obviously Elden Ring is a game that does have balance, with its singular difficulty and maybe its more clear design focus, Elden Ring always gets to be that S+ combat experience, whereas perhaps Forbidden West doesn't always get to be that, and with its very traditional yet well executed open world, I think a situation where some people, myself included, are beginning to just be tired of the format.
Yeah, we were discussing it in the office recently, and obviously beside it being Horizon 0 rewards and then Horizon Forbidden nominations where it got didn't get any rewards whatsoever. We're talking about how the experience of it overall goes, and obviously Breath of the Wild killed Horizon Zero Dawn in a way because it was just here's the more interesting version of this open world stuff. Elden Ring did the same to Forbidden West, which is really unfortunate for that studio because they are actually fantastic game devs. But it was more the way all the RPGification and the combat system, the open world stuff was. Horizon just feels like a very slow, calm walk up a mountain where you never feel the benefit of I really had a big experience. The only time you get a big experience is some set piece stuff or a little bit of the narrative trying to spike some interest in you. Whereas Elden Ring is more there's not a straight path. There's loads of bumps and valleys and peaks on the way because of how the difficulty is scaled, basically based off how they were talking about Armored Core 6's difficulty in a recent interview. And it's more or less, there's just a bit more character to the path in other games, and for Horizon it's a little bit too milquetoast, despite being on a technical capacity extremely well done.
very well done, but ultimately it is the thing that you have done very well is maybe just not as resonating with people.
Exactly.
I would like to see Guerrilla apply themselves to less in a more focused game.
Yeah,
I think that would result in a larger experience, and I think if you take a look at like God of War, they really tried to strip that down to the minimum in a way that they could do, so that they could then execute everything to levels of polish beyond what anyone had expected in the industry. I think I just need to do that. We've got Gran Turismo 7. We'll do this quickly. Right, overall, as a video game, yeah, brilliant. It's Gran Turismo, but all of its bullshit early on with the microtransactions, right? The way that things were priced in a way that was pretty damn predatory, that was frankly total price gouging compared to literally buying the same cars in previous entries in the same series. Yeah. And they did make some initial improvements. I think there's been some flipping and flopping in that. Overall, I do think should have been a clear win, but now it's just mixed, and I think in its own corner, it has not in any way done a Forza.
Yeah, it'll be Gran Turismo 8 before Sony got to come out and say, hey, Gran Turismo's back and it's good and everyone loves it. Because you see there, it's got a 21 Metacritic rating. And that is just profoundly. You damaged your reputation with your fans because you monetized your game a little bit too hard. Doesn't matter how solid your game is otherwise. And even then, with no big, I mean, it's the way we always describe it, the no big No Man's Sky kind of, hey, we're sorry, we've made this right, with no marketing push behind that. Even if it is a little better now, that Metacritic rating is just going to stay there forever. Yeah. And that's just going to be one of the small black marks in Sony's book so far this year.
I think very outside our wheelhouse, there is MLB The Show, which is Sony's multi-plat. I think everyone forgets that, basically.
Yeah.
54 user on Metacritic. There had been the usual sort of drama with that. Pretty decent game, but overall, I think it is a game that is just off in its own corner.
Yeah, I do think it's important to highlight though as part of their overall strategy. That's one of their live service titles that they just go, hey, we're just going to make this and we'll just keep it and it'll just keep pumping money the whole time. And I don't know overall how successful it is, but it's very clearly I think they call it one of their live services in their earnings calls or their presentations for investors. So it is very much, it's an important part of the strategy. It just seems to be very, we don't care.
Yeah, and it's a strategy they want to go harder on, which we'll talk about soon. Right, Last of Us Part 1, remastered. It's a bit weird, right? Like, there's obviously a backlash because people feel like, okay, you're kind of taking the piss. What we then kind of came to understand, though, is that essentially it seems that Naughty Dog kind of blew their load a bit with Last of Us Part 2. And I say that to essentially mean they didn't really directly have the next thing lined up. So per a lot of the rumor mill, they basically had a whole bunch of staff. They had to put them on something, I suppose, while a more exploratory team works on pre-production of whatever's coming next. And I suppose whatever's going on with the multiplayer situation, right, with Part 2. So yeah, it's a bit weird. If you are just playing Last of Us Part 1, which is I think a marvelous game, this is absolutely the addition to get. But to a lot of people, it just feels a little bit silly.
Yeah, especially with it being priced £70 or on the PlayStation Store, and then it being priced at $50 on Steam.
I mean, put it this way: if this was The Witcher, this would be a free update.
Exactly.
And the reason why it would perform well in the market is everyone being super excited. Just more sales in general. That being said, I do think that a lot of stuff was actually literally remade.
Yes.
For this game to exist, which would be unlike one of those, next-gen editions that we usually expect. So it's one of those things. A lot of work was done. I think it's just a lot of work that is only of super high value to the people who are diehard fans of that game, or to people who have not played it before. But to the broad market, or maybe those who are a little bit, obviously some brand damage was taken there. I think if that brand damage wasn't taken with Last of Us Part 2, within some segments of its fan base, maybe it would be different. Sackboy, Big Adventure. Yeah. I mean, good game, but also is what it is. Didn't have particularly strong concurrence with its Steam release. So
it's one of those things that I don't think anyone on Steam is going to be particularly excited by Sackboy. If you're super into Little Big Planet, super into Sony properties, and you have a PS5 to play with your family and stuff, yeah, that's likely to be a wonderful game. But just they made it. It's fine. They made it. It's fine. The other PC release then, there's two of their other PC releases, but Marvel Spider-Man Remastered, of course, that's just a win because they put Spider-Man on PC and it runs really well. And I was like, okay, sweet. There's not even much to say about that. It's literally just
it does have this 48 user Metacritic, but that's only out of 100 reviews. And remember, we never take Metacritic user reviews to actually be what these reviewers think of the game. No. We just take it to be, If that number is low, that is just an indicator that there has been some form of outrage, be that broad or niche, and that has impacted the score. Overall, I think this is something that, assuming, it's going to run fine in your computer, we could heartily recommend to everyone.
Yeah, both the Spider-Man games are some of my favorite games the past, maybe 5 or 6 years, because they are just... It's Insomniac. I like Ratchet and Clank. They applied the way they make those games, the Spider-Man games, as opposed to God of War being more of a AAA movie game, which obviously I think it dispels that through having really solid combat and stuff, and not being quite as movie-ish as Last of Us or Uncharted tends to be. But the Spider-Man games are just, hey, here's the video game, actual video game in every capacity. It just is high budget, wonderful.
Insomniac go hard, and they're going to be going hard in the future. They've got a pretty impressively aggressive launch slate coming up.
Venom and Wolverine.
Yep.
It's enough, crazy.
So there's also finally God of War Ragnarok. Overall, does appear to be continuation of Masterpiece, but absolutely continuation.
Yeah, I think that's where most people have issues, if they have issues at all. It's hey, this is really safe. It's almost like not as extreme a case with Forbidden West, where Horizon is just hey, this is really super what we expected. You're not really giving us anything. You're giving us what we want, but we would also like to be surprised. Also like to be shocked. Oh, this is this is really good. This is super unique. But obviously the issue there is Sony are still battling hey, we're releasing these games on PS4. So there's nothing technically and nothing creatively that goes, oh, this is extremely next level. So people are kind of going, God of War 2 is God of War 1, but there's a load more enemies, but it still suffers from a lot of where's the spirit, where's me feeling alive? That was also missing in God of War, because with a studio that size and studio that good, they're going to be focusing on, okay, how can we do everything we want to do perfectly? But obviously their main focus is on having a great combat system and also having, I guess, Chris Judge do an exceptional job as Kratos. And it's that's perfect, that's wonderful, but it's also not Elden Ring, where it's people play that game and go, I haven't felt this before. What is this? And that's what all of Sony's first-party titles are basically lacking, because they're playing it, just reasonably safe most of the time.
Yes, they are. They are not trying to make a low-budget movie that, like the Terminator, ends up being absolutely humongous, right? They are trying to make the safe blockbuster. But rather than me saying that in the context of this, they want to make loads of Marvel movies, no, they're more trying to be like a Chris Nolan blockbuster, where, yes, it's a big Hollywood blockbuster, or, maybe some of Denis, but it does have, more of that kind of, emotional heft to it. When we go on to the themes then of Sony, it is funny that the only PS5 exclusive is a remaster. Yeah, The Last of Us Part 1 is the only thing that's a PS5 exclusive, so maybe if you wanted a bit of a glimpse into the most PS5-ishness, then that would be the thing. But overall, 4 new games from Sony, 6 ports or remakes. PC is really helping to keep their numbers up. Your TLDR is, there have been a few road bumps, but broadly, fantastic games. We've then got premium indies, Roller Dome, Sifu, right? Those are all PlayStation 5 first. And, Stray, obviously, massive in Sony's marketing.
And PS Plus. I think it was because they did that PS Plus wrap-up, and I think Stray was can't remember exactly what, but it was more or less the most played game, or the most played game upon PS Plus's free game catalog, more than any of the Sony first parties, which you'd expect to be pretty big. But Stray was one that's hey, it's not really a Sony game, but it is a Sony game. So I think for console owners and PS Plus owners, that's going to be a pretty good value add, which is, that's where you get the idea of, oh, hey, Stray's an interesting game. That's a new experience we'll have. Whereas obviously the first party didn't actually provide that whatsoever. They supplemented it with PS Plus, just going, hello, you've got a game that we think is interesting, have a load of money and our players can play it, which is obviously that's basically everyone's strategy now.
Yep, that is how I played Stray. In terms of delays, we basically no, there are not delays. Yes, that we know of. So nothing where they've publicly said something will come out and then they've pulled that away. Now, there have been games that have had delays that have came out this year, but nothing really major as we're going into the new year. With Ragnarok, some people had expectations that were different from reality, but they only confirmed its release date officially in July of this year. So that's overall the situation. I think in the PC front, we are just seeing them play it safe, and they're okay to be, late. and it seems like people still do show up to buy things. Ongoing titles then, where we do have Destiny, because Destiny is a bit more important. Well, it's a Sony-owned thing now.
That still doesn't like ring true in my head. I know it's been the case for a long time, but I just don't think. I guess that's because like Destiny 2 is off in its own corner, being very quietly doing a great job over else, and maybe not doing an always great job, and then promising to do a great job later, and then eventually. So it's just over there, live servicing its way across.
Their most recent expansion was unanimously like praised, from what I could tell, but they have had issues with their seasons feeling very samey. That is something that their director actually spoke to people about, which was, you know what, I thought it was great to see. It's the sort of thing where, man, if the, say, director of World of Warcraft was kind of able to just, and I assume that maybe he would want to, but kind of isn't allowed to because of how PR works. But of course, Destiny, you know, it's made by Bungie, a broadly independent studio. Not anymore, but that was like a little bit of their DNA. It is kind of funny, though, that, you know, Bungie, Microsoft, Activision, independent, Sony.
Storied history.
Yeah, they're just going all over the place. And of course, that's not even considering that Halo was supposed to be a real-time strategy for Mac.
Yep.
Before it was an FPS. So they've even touched Apple. They've got Apple, Microsoft, Sony, Xbox. It's incredible. They've been everywhere.
Yeah, and it's interesting
Other than Nintendo.
Yeah. It's interesting to think that for them to get into bed with Sony implies that Sony actually had made a really compelling offer, but also really compelling like contract of, hey, we're going to let you do your thing, because they were so burned.
Yes,
they were burned by everyone they ever had dealings with.
Here's what's fascinating. NetEase. NetEase made a pretty sizable strategic investment into this company.
Sure did.
And it was notably for not just Destiny 2.
Something new.
So with this acquisition then, does that mean that a big investor like NetEase, do they still have ownership in that company? Or have Sony bought them out? Whatever is happening there, I don't think will matter too much to us right now, other than they've definitely had something else going on that has been significantly funded for a significant amount of time, and perhaps we can see, yes, that a degree of Sony's decision-making is based on Destiny, but surely given Sony's broader macro strategy over the next 5 years, they're also thinking not only are these guys live service experts, but what about that other thing that NetEase almost certainly funded? Now, it could be whatever that is cancelled, and maybe it is just Destiny. Obviously, I'm not an insider, but we do know that Sony have, they have 3 live services, including MLB 2022, by the end of this fiscal year. We also know they've got multiple in development for simultaneous release on PC and consoles. And that even includes some Treyarch developers, which, if Call of Duty does end up being a franchise that has a legally binding agreement with the US government that it must come out on Sony for 10 years, maybe they're thinking, right, shit, Deviation, the ex-Treyarch devs, have got to be able to compete with COD within a decade.
Yeah, except for all the news that came out around Deviation seemingly being a revolving door studio, because nothing's ever really simple. It's like, hey, here's a brilliant new studio, and then the brilliant new studio immediately has bad rumors coming out of it. Cool. It gets quite difficult to keep track of all these things, to be honest.
So with that, it's time to go through the greatest hits of 2022. And man, there have been ones. So we started the year with an indie revolt. Basically, Sony were not showing interest in indies, right? Now, they have made steps to remedy that.
It's just big time, seemingly.
Yeah, they are large steps. What I can say is that they have been having quantities of money to secure indies on their platform that have been going around. This is being talked about amongst many independent developers. It's the sort of thing I think consumers won't really have heard about, but it is knowledge in the public domain amongst circles of developers. So broadly speaking, their desire to do better there has been seen as quite genuine and one that is backed up with actual funding. That's definitely nice to see. And our understanding of those issues with the store are quite literally that the store is really quite badly architected and quite badly designed and runs in a bunch of legacy systems. And in fairness, if you go onto the PlayStation Store, you will readily see that. Outside of their curated editor's picks and stuff like that, the store is a little bit of a mess, full of shovelware titles, and it's quite hard to browse.
Yeah, it's like people would complain about that for Steam, but Steam's algorithm lets you ignore that unless you want to delve into it.
Yeah.
So it's literally Sony are falling into that problem, but hopefully they will solve it. And to be fair, I will say the intended experience, if you're a PS Plus subscriber, where you don't spend an awful lot of extra money and you just browse through the games that you have available to you in the game catalog. The selection they have there is very good. They could have filled it with shovelware, and they went out of their way not to, largely. So it is a good experience.
So there's been a bit more of a limited release of those classic titles. We've not seen the full rollout of demos. I haven't used the demos, though I would imagine that to a lot of people the demos are a decently good value add, even though there was some criticism from some developers, but we've seen pretty chunky games make it over there. Yeah, so one thing though, and I suppose this is in the midst of an interesting macroeconomic situation where numbers have reduced with 2 million subs dropping since the June launch to 45 million. According to Sony, that is mostly amongst PS4 users, so I wouldn't really see that as being a large issue. PS4 has got a humongous install base still, but this is a very forward-looking thing. If this was to continue to drop, I would be quite concerned. I think one of the differences, though, is, well, I mean, hey, you just think about, like, Game Pass. Sony can now compete. They could not compete before. That's a game changer.
And, like, you could argue the intricacies of how they could compete and go, oh, well, Xbox has, it has it on PC. They have all those, like, they have better indies. They have better day one indies. They've got, like, a more interesting range. But if you're looking for, like, playtime of interesting games, if you get either of those, you've got probably years of playing games ahead of you. Like, that's the one thing I noticed. I was even going through because I resubbed for PS Plus with the Black Friday deal they had for a year, and I was sitting going through the game catalog going, I don't have time to touch a fraction of what I want to play here. And that was even mostly me looking at a bunch of the, like, Nipponichi stuff and the Idea Factory games that I haven't got to play, and then, like, the Yakuza series, and just going, this is a lot. Yeah, this is a lot of good game. If I want an indie, I'll maybe sub to Game Pass for a month, but if I don't, I'll just sit and think, because I like the PS5 a little bit more than Xbox stuff. That's what they wanted, and it's what they seem to have gotten out of it. And I imagine dropping subs will also be attributed to, hey, we've changed this, and then people have like a moment of, oh, well, I've been permanently subbed to this for so long, oh, maybe I'll reevaluate that now.
That's
dropping out. As opposed to like, oh, this is a worse deal. It might just be people going, oh, I'll reevaluate. Oh, maybe I don't play as many games anymore.
That is why businesses will do everything they can to not change a subscription price. Although we have seen with the likes of Netflix a situation where they have such a large, like almost mandatory spending, amount of spending to actually build up their library that they essentially have no choice but to do stuff like that. But anytime a deal changes in a way where a user kind of has to, basically, decisions in a way are an enemy of business. And that might sound a bit controversial. Maybe another day I'll talk about it more. Now, speaking of pricing decisions, this is where Sony have been industry leaders in a way that a lot of consumers don't necessarily appreciate. So we've got the whole games now. They cost $69.99 here in the UK.
And that has actually already, on multiple occasions, changed my decision to purchase games with the new. I haven't bought God of War Ragnarok because I went, no, that's too much money.
Yeah, and I mean, if I was to do, hey Siri, $69.99 British pounds into United States dollars. And you know what we'll find with this is, so hey everyone in America, we pay $85 for games. Basically, we pay $85 for games. That's kind of stinging. And in a lot of European countries also, there are some issues there. That's because of the euro. The euro is one currency across multiple different regions, and that can certainly lead to situations where some countries with, maybe some countries that aren't as well off, they're going to have a harder time paying for their games than maybe somebody in Germany or France, right? Mm-hmm. So that's something we constantly hear about in gaming. Obviously, over in the States, that has increased as well from the $60 to the $70. And that's been something they've led. They've then had some controversies with Horizon Forbidden West, where Sony Store directed people to the more expensive PS5 version instead of the cheaper PS4 version that contained a free upgrade. So these were functionally identical. It's just that this functionally identical thing was basically they bamboozled people into paying more money in such a way that they could technically sort of stick by their past agreements, but then only guide users through the more expensive way. Yeah. And it was very deceptive. It was very bad form. We did not like that whatsoever. Also, fairly recent release, I believe, and it's actually a $20 premium to be in the PS5.
That would be Last of Us Part 1.
That's it,
It's £20 more expensive on PS5 than on Steam.
Like, how is It's weird because you say, where is the justification? Because not only do Sony, they obviously don't get 100% of the sales from the store because there's payment processing, but on Steam, it's 30%, then it's 25%, then it's 20%. Depending on the total sales volume. I believe it's 20% after $50 million of revenue. So it's actually cheaper in Steam, even though Gabe is getting to fund his personal knife collection through it.
Yeah, and I think the people have like cottoned on to the justification being people will buy it on the PS Store for £70.
Yep.
People will not buy it on Steam for £70, but they'll buy it on Steam for £50. And that's just that kind of, yeah, is this just it's priced to what people will pay? Yeah, does that feel right and fair? No. Does it matter ultimately to the bottom line? No.
Anyone who's seen a mobile phone knows that, Apple customers are more willing to pay for apps, and sometimes that means they get a worse deal. Sometimes it means the developers will prioritize Apple, and that will mean that Apple users get better native apps, right?
Yeah.
Pretty common thing. We then, of course, have got other price increases. The consoles all increased in price. An interesting situation. I don't want to speculate too much on it. I do know that both companies, of course, will be, in many cases, losing money when they sell consoles. I think it's just that Microsoft, as a broader organization backed up by, its very large consumer division and its very, very, very large enterprise division, they are going to be more willing to eat losses in the name of future growth than Sony are, where, PlayStation is the thing that's really, in recent history, been really holding Sony up. Sony's definitely been a troubled overall organization from a lot of what I could tell.
Yeah, it's just that thing of Microsoft can eat the loss, so customers have to eat the loss for Sony because they physically can't. And that's going to be a marginal impact, I imagine, overall, considering in the price of, obviously this is a pretty, big price increase, especially when you look at the cost of the Series S being, low and aggressive on Black Friday. So it's that'll be, one of the small things that wins them more market share overall, but ultimately it shouldn't be, a massive swing. I think it's just one of the things going, a little bit more of a premium to be in PS5. Can Sony make that feel good? Yeah, and so far they mostly succeeded.
So then in the world of M&A, we do have the acquisitions, of course, of Bungie, of Haven Studios, Repeat.gg, which is an esports tournament service, and Savage Game Studios, who are a mobile studio. So decent little bit of M&A there, but obviously compared to Microsoft, utter drop in the bucket. Yeah, and then finally, unless you want to do a little bit more in M&A?
Yeah, the only small thing I want to say is this is because they bought over Evo in 2021.
Ah, yes.
And 2022 was the first Evo that was in person again, and it was a fantastic event. So the fact that they own that, obviously, they probably don't have too much say. They just let them run it wherever they want. But it's still that's a pretty big value add, and that's let them have the in to get the But we'll talk about this a little bit later. But Street Fighter, Tekken, getting the leg up on supporting those. There's big room for them to kind of control a little bit more of that esports segment, which obviously won't be a massive thing. But in terms of the player experience to that kind of player, you're going to drive a lot more people towards that platform because your platform is actually good for that.
Then we got the relaunch of PlayStation Mobile. I don't have too much to say about it other than I think it's a really nice app. The ability to buy a game and good, the way you can download it if you're away from home. Honestly, it's more just good because PSN ain't as fast as Steam. So
yeah, I mean that worked for me on the Game Awards night there, where they're hey, for spoken demo. And I was well, I'm sitting on my PC talking to people in Discord watching the Game Awards. I'm not going to go into the living room and turn on the PS5 and download stuff. So I just pulled out my phone and I was download that and I'll play tomorrow. And it worked. And I was oh yeah, that was a good experience. Nice.
Yeah, no, absolutely fair play to them. Their mobile app is really nice. Mm-hmm. So then we look to the future. We look to 2023. That's where we've got PlayStation VR 2. It's launching in February. It will cost $550 and it will have a launch library that does feature some new exclusive things. We've got Horizon Call of the Mountain, but yeah, mostly it's upgraded ports for that device. Overall, it's quite challenging there. I think that their virtual reality play almost harkens back to the exclusivity model that got them to where they are. Because if I'm going to play Beat Saber, I'm going to get a Meta Quest 2 because 90 Hz is going to be good enough for most situations. That can be used in the pass-through mode if you wanted to use that with your PC, and then you can use it with inside-out tracking just in your living room. You don't have to set anything up, and it's just really good. The controllers are very solid, especially if you buy a few aftermarket upgrades. And it's, $400 now. So I think for $400, you're getting a device that'll go into your PC that also has a bunch of, honestly, pretty fantastic standalone capabilities. I would say that the Meta Quest 2 is an astoundingly good deal, even at the price that it is. Did have the $100 price increase. Obviously, Meta, big laugh at them.
Demons.
But as compared to PSVR 2, I mean, what am I going to care about? I'm going to care about like maybe Boneworks, Half-Life Alyx. Those things are both possible with a Quest 2 in the pass-through mode. Obviously, it's better with, say, a Valve Index, the Knuckles controllers, but hey, you can still get a lot of bang for your buck in that situation. Now, obviously, a PlayStation gamer without a gaming PC, their only option is PSVR 2. Maybe that's just what Sony are doing, in which case I would say this is a continuation of their premium play. They are trying to have a foothold in this market. It's evidently one that Microsoft doesn't care to be in, but I do think that this is probably all just a very high margin area. When you look at a whole bunch of those VR titles, you know, it's not as competitive of a market. You are generally going to pay more money for less game, but a more novel experience. And I think that is a basic contract that has existed with VR developers for a long time. And look, that's what I would follow if I was making a VR game. Absolutely. Like, you are making something for a smaller audience, so you cannot have this, like, you know, big economy of scale situation. And then that can be quite tricky, because if Sony truly wanted to grow this, they would need the likes of Horizon Call of the Mountain. It would have to be the Zero Dawn of VR. It would have to be, one could say, the Half-Life Alyx of VR. Because take a look at Steam. Its best selling is sorted by gross revenue, and Valve Index is like always there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of wealthy folks in the world, and they like to buy indexes. I suppose it's that sort of thing. When we talk about games, we look at games on YouTube. There's obviously great channels like VR Oasis, but VR Oasis is a pretty well-named channel. It's a more niche community. They don't have, I think, a humongous macro effect on the games market. So it is just more there as a niche. But is it still a profitable niche? Because if the index is always in your like top few grossing titles in Steam, even though people don't talk about it, they're selling a lot of units.
Depends on if you've got all of the compatibility with the apps you want. Because
Yeah.
I mean, imagine how much index purchases are going to people using VR chat for the social side of it. Whereas this, you know, is that possibility going to be there with VR 2 in the same extent? Hard to know. But
Yeah. We then have their transmedia narrative strategy, which is interesting to me because the Uncharted movie was, shall we say, unremarkable. Look, people might like it, that's fair, but it's a sort of thing where if you see a Fast and Furious movie and it's like, you know what, it's kind of like the previous one, but still pretty good. It's not remarkable, but you got what you wanted. And I think that's exactly how that movie was received. It won't grow the brand. It may not appeal to people who like the core brand, but I think as a, you know, general movie that happens, that people can consume and then it's done, that's all that was. But Last of Us, the HBO series, I mean, you look at the two lead actors. I haven't seen as much of, obviously, very beloved because her character pretty cool in Game of Thrones. One of the things in later Game of Thrones that I think was mostly unanimously liked by people. So I think people have a really good perception of her. I haven't really seen her in anything else. Pedro Pascal is obviously a marvelous actor. So, you know, I think he'll do a great Joel. And HBO, like, look, they've I don't want to say they've been on fire as some sort of lame Targaryen reference, but House of the Dragon is a thoroughly, stunningly good show. It's one of those shows that really does make you have a bit of a laugh at initial critic reviews, where everyone, to be honest, I would say was doing a little bit of a right think with Rings of Power. I don't mean this in a culture war-ish context, but I would say that in terms of basic things such as pacing, story structure, dialogue, etc., you have a bizarre situation where, like, House of the Dragon, it felt like people were like, oh, this is less remarkable, and all the media was going insane over Rings of Power. And then House of the Dragon keeps on going. People are like, holy fuck, every episode is building on every previous episode. Not a single ounce of screen time is missed. And then by the end, you know, they don't, no spoilers, but they don't end that on some calamitous big battle or action scene. They end it on a character's face reacting to something in a way that is like the most, oh fuck, you know, moment in a way that Rings of Power kind of never really did. I'd say that just to say that, like, HBO have been, I mean, they've definitely, there's been some L's. Westworld Season 4, Humongo L, the destruction of the Westworld, what could have been a fruitful franchise after its first season, a big L. Turns out you lose Anthony Hopkins and you might have issues. But House of the Dragon, they've been on fire. I think Last of Us is something that could be set up to be pretty good. Gran Turismo, I mean, man, the sports movie.
yeah, that's the weird part. It's hard to know what they're going to do with Gran Turismo ultimately. but it depends if they can get something that feels very sports movies, very here's like, hey, here's the feeling you get of racing a car, and all of like if they can get work in all of like the gearhead details that they do in a Gran Turismo, being like the accurate simulation kind of game. If they can do that, then they could have like this two-pronged approach to getting the Gran Turismo niche. Hey, get a game now, ignore the Metacritic rating, go buy it, you'll get this experience. And then same with The Last of Us, where it goes, hey, we're actually kind of winning a little bit on brand in a more, this is going to be a weird way to describe it, but almost like a more normie way of Arcane.
Well, what I would say is there's been quite a lot of really good historical motorsports movies over the last, like Ford versus Ferrari, stuff like that, over the last few years. So it's like, if they can tap into almost, that old style grandeur, a lot of the gearhead love of Formula One. Yeah, I mean, I put that in as a strong reinforcement of what you said, with the little thing that I think for a lot of people, like the actual core narratives of some motorsports movies that have came out in the last few years, you don't need to be a motorsports fan to have watched those movies. They're really good movies with really good stories and like good characters, and turns out reality can be pretty interesting when it's dramatized. I think there's, good potential there.
Oh, yeah, that's right. There's also, I thought there was something missing. There's also a God of War show that was just announced for Amazon. That'll be another part of their transmedia narrative push. It'll be God of War. How are you going to do that in a TV show? I suppose they'll just do The Last of Us model, where it's like, hey, this isn't Chris Judge, but it's somebody who looks like Kratos. Work away, I'll be fine. That'll be interesting.
Don't be cowards. Make it be Chris Judge. Make it be Chris Judge. And then bring Stargate back and bring Teal'c back. There are rumors that Amazon wants to do something with Stargate now that MGM has been acquired by them. So, Chris Judge stocks, they are up. They can have Teal'c and Kratos in the same place.
Perfect.
That would be pretty awesome.
Yeah.
As we go into 2023, Spider-Man 2 is the only new game they've got scheduled. Yeah. Likely other things will happen, though, because as of the Game Awards, we do have Returnal on PC early 2023. We've got Last of Us Part 1 on 3/3/23. After it's, of course, September 2022, broader release. Then we do know that there are games with marketing and exclusivity deals. Final Fantasy 16.
Like, honestly, FF16 is just going to be it's going to be an absolutely unbelievably gigantic one, especially as I know a couple people on Twitter are annoyed that the constant comparisons to Game of Thrones, because medieval fantasy, like, it's the Game of Thrones thing. That's popular now. But I think that'll just be like that. If that works for broader marketing, then FF16 could be a unbelievable win for Sony, despite being a Square Enix game. As is, anyone want to look at Final Fantasy VII back in the day, for an example of that, being the case of Sony can have partners that do a lot of the work for them. And that's just profoundly going to work out for them. Yeah, for Spoken, maybe not.
Hang on, you said maybe not, but you played the demo.
Yeah. So, very mid.
So
very mid.
Is a bit of broader context here that looks very good, as isn't it? Luminous, yes.
Luminous Productions.
Looks very good. Its combat looks like it could be very good when you just look at it in a video, but then when you play it, issues arise. Is that kind of your read?
Yes. So I didn't play an extreme amount of the demo. The skill tree looks like they've went, hey, this is baby's first character action with plenty of depth, but we've went for this interesting magic parkour, but they've made it feel a little bit limited in terms of how much stamina you have for blasting around at full speed. And it's also like, here's a load of Ubisoft open world stuff. Because there's not much of like the plot visible in the earlier bits of the demo, maybe it's a much more interesting game. But as far as I'm concerned, this will be a nice gameplay playground, and maybe there'll be some fun in the writing, but it is going to be a little bit of, why did you make this again?
Is this an 80?
This is a solid 82 with a user score of maybe 65.
You heard it here first. Now, we are not available on betting websites, but if you would like to bet on the predictions of Matt, then you'll just have to do it with your friends. So we'll have to see what Sony come out with as time goes on. They've had an extremely strong time. They clearly got a lot of games lined up so that they could utterly BTFO our boys over at Microsoft, which ultimately is what's happened on the exclusive front. We do know we've got Wolverine.
Yep.
There's probably going to be something else ratchety happening. So, I mean, what a powerful bunch Insomniac are. There is going to be the big next thing from Naughty Dog. Perhaps we could expect a reveal of that in order to bolster a broader, platform sort of thing where, you want your fans to know there's something cool. Of course, the developers of Returnal, they'll likely be working on something.
Smart, yep.
We also know that Cory Barlog was not the director of God of War Ragnarok. He was doing something else. What was he leading?
Yeah, that'd be interesting to see where they go with because Santa Monica seem to have a lot of resources. Or like, what exactly are you doing? Yeah. And then there's there's like the wild card, which is Bluepoint, and Bluepoint are making an original game. You're like, well, that's interesting because you've basically never done that before, but you're clearly really talented visually, and you have worked with some of the, like, obviously working with Demon's Souls, like you know what a good game looks like. So whatever they come out with will likely be really interesting. And we have no idea what that is or when it could be. And then there's always the fact that at any point in time, and I know this is pure cope, but at any point in time they could just say, Bloodborne's on PS5 now, go buy it for $70.
Yeah.
And everyone will go, you're only charging $70? That's awful nice of you. We'll have that, please.
It is undeniable that is a button they can press.
That is just a hand hovering over the nuke button at any time going, we would like to control all of internet discourse and make a couple million sales just whenever we need to.
Yes.
What's that? Starfield's out? What's that? Fable's out? Anytime, like.
I have never played Bloodborne.
Yeah.
Even though anytime I look at it, I think, wow. The reason why is really simple. I hear about the frame timing issues.
Yeah.
I hear that it's still, there's no 60 FPS for it.
It sucks.
And I think about, okay, Bloodborne. This is like Dark Souls when it was only available on, only on the consoles, and Blighttown ran at 15 frames a second. And then Dark Souls comes out onto PC. Then
Durante throws a 60 FPS patch out and everyone goes, yo!
Yeah, then Durante makes a big corporation, many millions of dollars.
Thanks, Durante, for Elden Ring.
Thanks. Yeah, thankfully, Durante's since been able to spin that into a career, which I mean is so utterly deserved. So overall, then, we're in a situation where the future of this brand is one where we know what they want to do, but not that much has been announced. Now, one of the things that they could do is announce things early in order to instill confidence that good times are just around the corner, or they could be trying to pull a bit of a Fallout 4 in the announce something and then in 6 months it will be released. You could perhaps say that with God of War Ragnarok, that's a situation where the consoles were coming out and they wanted people to know this thing exists when they are making their purchase decision. Evidently, this is a position where they want to maintain their strong market lead. They have sold more consoles than Microsoft have. Now, of course, Microsoft does have access to the entire of PC via Game Pass, but undeniably, Sony are the console kings. As much as the battery life of the PlayStation 5 controller makes me infinitely irate, especially with how it is so picky in what sorts of USB cables it will actually handshake with and charge properly with. That makes me very, very, very happy and pleased. Yay. Other than that, Sony they're putting their dick in the table. And what I mean by that is very confident. One could say overconfident, almost just a bit vulgar in their overconfidence, because they know they can say, this new game's worth $85 equivalent if you're here, or, $70 in the US. They know they can do that. And they were industry leaders in driving up the margins of so many companies. So, no doubt plenty of other companies are like, cheers for taking the PR hit, Sony, you've normalized it. Yep. We'll take a PR hit, but it'll be smaller because you made it happen. You were the you were the very thick thin end of the wedge. But it's that sort of thing. They have bristled against people in a bit of the wrong way. They have their ongoing, fun time with people who maybe will like to play their Senran Kagura games on the family-friendly Nintendo Switch rather than the PlayStation 5, which I more bring up because that's hilarious. I would also say almost certainly immaterial to their bottom line. Definitely. That's more noise online. I don't say that to downplay people's concerns. I just say that in a world where this winning strategy for them appears to be Last of Us Part 1, for that amount of money, outvote it on $1.
Yeah, you want the tens of millions of sales of God of War and Spider-Man 2. That's what's going to matter to them ultimately. Yeah. They're happy to accept the other losses if they need to.
I think about Apple here, actually. So Apple are bullish in their pricing. They make a lot of enemies by saying, are things expensive? Now, I would say that Apple generally does, because of course value and price are very different things. Fantastic recent video on Linus Tech Tips about that within the GPU market. The idea that if you buy like the 1030 or the 1630 or the 1650 versus maybe like the 1660, the cheap thing is an awful value. So I would say that like a lot of Apple things, they're targeted like this, very expensive, very high value to me in my job. And I see that with PlayStation. For a lot of people, God of War Ragnarok, for a lot of people like, say, Last of Us Part 1, I would have paid £70 for that. If I knew how good and how like lasting my experience of Last of Us Part 1 would have been years ago, when games were 45 quid, I would have said, fuck it, I'll pay 70 for that, purely because like this game is so pure and powerful. In the same way that, people after maybe finding Endwalker to be a life-changing experience, look at Final Fantasy 14 and think like, why aren't you like a $1,000 life-changing like course on the internet? I know I'm taking the piss a bit, but you get what I mean. They're willing to say, no, we are premium, and we're going to back that up by you having a powerful experience. And they're going to make a lot of enemies along the way, but they're going to continue in this way. Microsoft, I think, is going to continue to struggle. Microsoft is, in my view, well poised for a lot of strength in the back half of this, because that's when their acquisition plays will actually come into force.
Yeah, we'll get to talk about that in the next part of our series.
Yep. But as for Sony then, in our inaugural episode of Worst of 2022, it's definitely not Sony, because Activision Blizzard exists.
Yeah,
And we can all just say that out of hand. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying that it's a foregone conclusion for Activision Blizzard, because a lot of other publishers out there. But Sony, they, I think, broadly speaking, for me, are going to get a favorable enough rating. Like all big publishers, in my view, they have rubbed some people the wrong way. They're a multi-billion business. That does sort of happen. I don't mean to underplay that. But when it comes to the actual games that they have released for their customers, they have, broadly speaking, ran well. I know there's been issues like, remember Forbidden West wasn't ideal on launch, but broadly speaking, their products have ran well. They have been giving people exactly what was described. They haven't really seemingly needed to rely on, rushing patches over the first 2 weeks to make their game not be totally bullshit. There's obvious losses.
Days Gone, like,
there's obvious like bad marks in the past, like Days
Ben
Gone.
Studio, just in general, having nightmare stuff, but that's...
Another obvious loss is just going to be some of their positioning around the Last of Us franchise with the pricing, Gran Turismo with the way that developer, maybe at PlayStation's behest, who knows, decided to monetize it. But broadly speaking, as much as Sony may rub people the wrong way, I think if we take an objective look at their output, Uncharted Legacy of Thieves collection, undeniably a good value. God of War, undeniably a good value. Forbidden West, as much as we maybe are not going to be giving it massive crazy praise, I think it's a good enough value, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we and I'm sure a lot of like you watching it will come from the same perspective as us, as this isn't really interesting. It's good, but it's not interesting, so we don't care so much. Whereas a lot of like the majority of like the massive audience will be like, this is good, I like it, without needing to be particularly interesting.
Yeah.
I think obviously you could argue Elden Ring kind of showed interesting does have big results, but it's also challenging to do.
Yeah, I mean, Spider-Man Remastered.
Yep.
Great. Yep. Last of Us Part 1. Amazing game. Probably didn't need to exist like this, but if you haven't played it and you picked this up, I think most people will be quite happy.
Yeah, if you're looking at it from the consumer experience perspective, as opposed to the meta perspective that we all look at these games as being involved in the industry, they've done very little wrong. They're uncontroversial, largely, but they're also unexciting to us.
Their controversies are not as large as other companies' controversies.
Yeah.
But their size does bring significant attention upon them. But I think ultimately when we look at some of the other controversies in the industry, it is hard to give Sony a bad scorecard at the end of the day. I know a lot of people will accuse us of humongous anti-Sony bias. And, maybe we do have some perspectives there that are not particularly objective. But, I mean, when we really do try to give them the honest score, even in light of the things that we'd be critical of, it is hard to give them a bad final remark.
They could very much be doing worse.
Yes.
And I think to end, we actually do have a little bit of news that they posted a blog post during this recording, just talking about 2023, confirming that Spider-Man 2 is launching in fall 2023, which means they might have something in store for the earlier in the year, but they also highlight a lot of attention to Resident Evil, Forspoken, the new controller, Hogwarts Legacy VR2, Destiny Lightfall, Resident Evil 4, and Final Fantasy 16. And if you think of all those as Sony games you can play on your PS5, you'll be fine waiting to fall for Spider-Man 2.
Yes.
Because that's a shit ton of games, and that is a lot of quality. They really are super bullish in like the copy in this, saying there's a stacked with the lineup of exciting releases. The coming year is huge for PlayStation. There's a ton coming in 2023. This article's a handful, and if this article's a handful, you're like, what does a lot look like? And then it says notes. This is a top level article highlighting specific launches and is not meant to be comprehensive. 2022, uncontroversial, not particularly exciting. Pretty just solid, like B+ across the board. Would have been like an A- if not for the Gran Turismo scuffage and trying to be a bit scummy with Forbidden West. Generally, hard to really hate them, basically, unless you like Sony Japan titles and are still mauling over them not making those, which I still am slowly. But I'm just like, fucking water under the bridge at this point in time, as long as they give Square Enix enough money for FF16. Oh, damn.
That's it. Yoshi P will save anything, apparently. So, there we go. That is our scorecard for Sony. Join us over the coming days, maybe weeks, as we journey to find the worst publisher of 2022.
Take bets. I think we all know which it is.
We will try our damnness to find something that is not the obvious one.
Yeah.
There's a chance it could be the obvious one, though.
Yeah, we'll find out.
All right. Take care. See you next time.